It was exactly 2 in the morning, and the rhythmic, high-pitched, relentless beep of the mechanical ventilator was the only thing standing between my newborn son and the end of his painfully short life. The air in the hospital corridor smelled of harsh chemical antiseptics, stale cafeteria coffee, and the sharp, metallic scent of pure fear. My hands were shaking with such violent tremors that I could barely maintain a grip on the smooth edges of my phone. My baby boy, Jet, had been born at just 27 weeks. He was a fragile, translucent little bird of a human, weighing a mere 2 pounds and 1 ounce. Right at this very moment, he was being prepped for emergency abdominal surgery. He had started coding 20 minutes ago. The alarms in the neonatal intensive care unit had screamed their terrifying, chaotic symphony. Doctors and nurses had rushed past me in a blur of blue scrubs, and I had been pushed out into the cold, unforgiving hallway, suffocating on my own terror. I needed my family. I leaned heavily against the pale blue cinder block wall, sliding down until I hit the cold linoleum floor and pulled up our family group chat. This was a digital space usually reserved for bragging about exclusive country club events, forwarding pictures from European vacations, and showcasing the endless vanity of the Boston elite. With trembling thumbs, I typed a message, pouring every ounce of my desperation into the words, "Jet is having emergency surgery. He is coding. Please pray for us." I stared at the glowing screen, hot tears blurring my vision, waiting for the flood of support. I waited for my father's reassuring text, for my sister's frantic call asking which hospital entrance to use. The phone buzzed almost instantly in my palm. It was from Aunt Cressida. Cressida was the wealthy, untouchable matriarch who controlled our entire family's fortune, reputation, and charitable foundation. But the notification wasn't a message of comfort. It was a photo. I clicked it open, and the image burned itself into my retinas forever. It was a close-up shot of her freshly manicured hand, the nails painted a flawless, glossy crimson. Her fingers were casually wrapped around the stem of a crystal champagne flute. The background was the luxurious, leather-clad interior of a first-class flight cabin. But the focal point of the image, the thing she wanted everyone to see, was wrapped around her wrist. It was a brand-new, diamond-encrusted, $90,000 Rolex watch. The caption beneath the photo read, "A little treat for myself after a successful charity run. Cheers to the good life." I stared at that message until my vision started to go dark at the edges. A little treat. My son was dying on a cold steel operating table just 50 feet away from me, his chest being sliced open, and my aunt was showing off a piece of jewelry that cost more than what most hardworking people make in an entire year. That message wasn't just tone-deaf. It was a rusty knife twisting slowly in my gut. It was a stark, unapologetic reminder of the cruelty I had endured my whole life. But sitting there on that hospital floor, staring at her glittering watch while my son fought for his next breath, something fundamental inside me snapped. I just didn't realize yet how far the rabbit hole of their betrayal went. I didn't know they were orchestrating a malicious, calculated plan to steal my future while I was trapped in this medical prison. And I certainly didn't know that my revenge would eventually tear our prestigious family apart on national television, destroying their empire piece by piece. To understand the sheer magnitude of that moment, you have to understand who I am and where I come from. My name is Maeve. I am 34 years old, and I work as a crisis management director for a massive, nationally recognized nonprofit organization. It is a grueling, intense, deeply complex job that requires me to handle high-stakes emergencies, audit massive federal funds, and navigate legal disasters on a daily basis. But to my family, I am just a low-level desk clerk working for a charity out of the goodness of my pathetic, bleeding heart. They never bothered to ask what my actual title was, and I stopped offering the information years ago. It was easier to let them think I was a failure than to fight for their validation. My husband, Declan, is a civil engineer. He is the grounding force in my life, a man whose quiet, unshakable strength has carried me through the darkest storms. When that photo from Cressida popped up on my screen, Declan was walking down the hallway toward me, holding 2 cups of water. He saw my face, dropped the cups, and rushed to my side. He looked over my shoulder, his exhausted, bloodshot eyes scanning the image of the Rolex, the champagne, the grotesque display of wealth in the face of our nightmare. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just knelt on the floor, wrapped his large, calloused hands around my trembling ones, and pressed his forehead against mine, grounding me to reality. "They don't matter right now, Maeve," Declan whispered, his voice rough and thick from lack of sleep. "Only Jet matters. Let them drown in their own champagne. We are right here. We are going to get through this." I looked down at my hands wrapped in his. They were cracked, peeling, and bleeding around the knuckles from the harsh antibacterial soap of the hospital scrub stations. I had washed them so many times today my skin felt like raw meat. And there, on my screen, was Cressida's soft, perfectly smooth hand, untouched by worry, untouched by pain. The contrast was sickening. It was a visual representation of our entire dynamic. She was the pristine, flawless queen of Boston society, and I was the messy, unfortunate secret they tried to sweep under the rug. For 4 agonizing hours, Declan and I sat in the cramped waiting area, staring relentlessly at the double doors of the surgical wing. Every time a nurse walked past, my heart stopped beating. Every time the intercom crackled to life, I expected the worst news a mother could ever hear. And in all those hours, as the clock ticked toward dawn, my phone remained dead silent. No follow-up texts. No phone calls. My father, Alistair, didn't reach out. My stepmother, Greer, was a ghost. My younger sister, Blair, the golden child of the family, was nowhere to be found. They had seen the message. I knew they had. The little red receipts on the chat app mocked me. When the pediatric surgeon finally emerged, his surgical cap pulled low, looking exhausted but offering a small, tight nod, I collapsed forward into Declan's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. Jet had made it through the surgery. He was stable, at least for the next few hours. They wheeled him back to his incubator, his tiny body covered in even more wires, tubes, and surgical dressings than before. He looked so small, so fragile, a tiny warrior fighting a battle no one should ever have to fight. I sat by his incubator as dawn broke over the city, the gray light of morning filtering through the small, high window of the NICU. I opened my phone again. The group chat was still frozen on that picture of the Rolex. It was as if my message about jet coding had never even existed. They had simply stepped over my bleeding heart to admire Cressida's new jewelry. A cold, hard knot formed deep in my stomach, replacing the hollow ache of fear. The tears stopped falling. The sadness began to curdle, hardening into something else entirely. It was an anger so deep, so profound, and so silent that it frightened me. I had spent my entire life trying to earn a place at their table. I had swallowed their insults, accepted their crumbs, and smiled through their subtle, daily rejections. But this was unforgivable. I looked at Jet, his tiny chest rising and falling with the mechanical hiss of the machine. I placed my raw, cracked hand against the warm plastic of the incubator. I promised him, right then and there, that I would never let them hurt him the way they had hurt me. I would protect him from their toxic influence, even if it meant burning down the bridge to my own family and dancing in the ashes. I just didn't know yet that they were already pouring the gasoline, and I was about to strike the match. If my family's history was a grand, sprawling museum, I was the janitor tasked with cleaning up the messes in the dark while they stood under the bright spotlights, admiring their own reflections in the exhibits. To truly grasp the weight of their silence in the NICU, to understand why Cressida's text wasn't just a lapse in judgment, but a calculated strike, you have to walk through the twisted galleries of my past. You have to see the artifacts of injustice that paved the winding, painful road to this exact moment. Let's start with Exhibit A, my graduation day. I had just earned my master's degree in public administration with highest honors. It was a feat I managed while working 2 grueling jobs, one at a diner, one at a campus library, to pay my own tuition and rent. My father, Alistair, a real estate millionaire who plastered his face on billboards and prided himself on his self-made image, had refused to contribute a single dime to my education. He claimed it would build character. He told me that handouts created weakness. Yet, when my younger sister Blair got accepted into a prestigious, high-priced law school just 3 years later, Character building was suddenly off the table. I remember standing on the campus green in my cheap, rented cap and gown, scanning the massive crowd of cheering families. The sun was beating down, families were holding balloons and flowers, and I was entirely alone. I waited for an hour after the ceremony, hoping they were just stuck in traffic. They weren't. Later that evening, swallowing my pride, I drove to my father's sprawling, gated estate for what I foolishly thought would be a private celebratory dinner. Instead, I walked into a lavish surprise party. For Blair. My father had just bought her a $1.2 million penthouse apartment in downtown Boston as a pre-graduation gift. I stood in the foyer, still holding my diploma folder, watching him hand her a set of shiny keys in front of 50 wealthy guests, beaming with the pride he had never once directed at me. When the crowd thinned, I quietly walked up to him and reminded him that it was, in fact, my actual graduation day. He didn't even have the decency to look embarrassed. He swirled his scotch, brushed a piece of lint off his tailored suit, and sighed. "Oh, right. Congratulations, Maeve. I had a charity golf tournament this morning. Totally slipped my mind. You know how these schedules are." Cressida, sipping a dry martini by the massive stone fireplace, didn't even bother to look me in the eye. She reached into her designer leather purse, pulled out a plain white envelope, and tossed it onto the coffee table like she was feeding a stray dog. "Here you go, dear. Don't spend it all in one place. We know how you struggle with budgeting." I opened it in my car later that night. It was a $50 gift card to a fast food burger chain. I kept that gift card in my wallet for years. Not to use it, but as a reminder. It was the exact monetary value they placed on my achievements, on my sweat, on my life. Exhibit B takes us to a formal family dinner 2 years before Jet was born. It was a stifling affair, fully catered, with several of my father's most important business partners in attendance. I had just landed my role as crisis management director. It was a massive promotion, a job that put me in charge of allocating millions of dollars in emergency federal funds. I was proud. I was finally making a tangible, massive difference in the world. When one of the older partners politely turned to me and asked what I did for a living, I sat up straighter, ready to explain my new role. But Cressida, sitting at the head of the table like a reigning monarch, cut me off before I could even finish my first sentence. "Oh, Maeve works in the charity sector," Cressida announced, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness and cutting condescension. She's always had such a bleeding heart. Bless her. She handles the "what is it you do, dear?" Filing paperwork for the homeless shelters? Organizing canned food drives? It's a nice little hobby, sitting at the bottom of the social ladder trying to lift people up. Someone has to do the dirty work, I suppose. The table chuckled politely. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, a humiliating flush burning all the way down to my neck. She had deliberately, skillfully reduced my demanding, high-stakes career to a pathetic, unskilled hobby. She made me sound like a naive volunteer. I looked at my father, expecting him to correct her, to defend me just this once. He just poured more expensive wine for his guests, nodded along with Cressida, and eagerly changed the subject back to commercial real estate zoning laws. They needed me to be the failure, the weak link, so that Blair's corporate success and Cressida's immense wealth could shine even brighter by comparison. But the most painful artifact in this museum of horrors, Exhibit C, is the memory of my 2 miscarriages. Before Jet, Declan and I had tried for 3 heartbreaking years to start a family. The first time I lost a pregnancy, I was at 12 weeks. I was shattered, bleeding, and drowning in a grief so heavy I couldn't get out of bed. In a moment of sheer vulnerability, I made the mistake of going to my father's house, seeking the comfort of a parent. Greer, my stepmother, was in the grand foyer, meticulously arranging a massive vase of imported lilies when I broke down in tears, confessing what had happened. She didn't drop the flowers. She didn't step forward to hug me. She didn't even offer me a tissue. She just sighed, adjusted a white lily with careful precision, and looked at me with cold, evaluating eyes. "Well, Maeve, you have always been rather fragile, haven't you? Perhaps your body just isn't suited to carry an heir. It's for the best, really. The family lineage requires a certain kind of strength, a certain fortitude. You can always look into adoption if you're feeling lonely. An heir. As if I were a medieval peasant failing to provide a king with a son to secure the throne. My profound, soul-crushing grief was nothing more than a biological failure, an inconvenience that proved I wasn't up to their genetic standards. These memories played on an endless, torturous loop in my mind as I sat next to Jet's incubator in the glowing, dim light of the NICU. The $50 gift card, the public mockery, the cold, clinical dismissal of my dead babies. It all culminated in that $90,000 Rolex shining on my phone screen. They hadn't changed. They hadn't grown. They had only gotten bolder, more refined in their cruelty. I had always thought of myself as the invisible child. The one who slipped through the cracks, unseen, unheard, and unvalued. I thought their neglect was just a byproduct of their overwhelming obsession with themselves and their public image. But I didn't know that my invisibility was a weapon they were actively, strategically using against me. I didn't know that my silence, my willingness to fade into the background, was the very key to a massive fortune Cressida was hiding in the shadows. And she was about to make the biggest, most catastrophic mistake of her miserable life. The first few days in a neonatal intensive care unit are a blur of adrenaline, medical jargon, and sheer, unadulterated panic. You operate on a primal level, vibrating with fear. But it's the weeks that follow that truly break you down, grinding your spirit into a fine dust. 35 days. That's how long I lived in a state of suspended animation, my entire universe shrinking down to the size of a clear, temperature-controlled plastic box. My daily routine became a brutal exercise in endurance. Every morning, I woke up at home at 4 a.m., my chest aching, and I sat in the dark living room hooked up to a breast pump while Declan quietly got ready for his shift at the engineering firm. Then, I drove through the gray, empty streets of Boston, parked in the massive concrete hospital garage, swiped my visitor badge, scrubbed my arms raw with iodine soap, and sat in a hard, unforgiving plastic chair for 10 to 12 hours straight. The NICU is a foreign planet. It has its own gravity, its own time zone, its own terrifying language. I learned to read the digital monitors before the nurses even had a chance to react. I knew that a sudden drop in heart rate, accompanied by the flashing red numbers of dropping oxygen levels, meant I needed to stand up quickly, open the porthole, and gently but firmly rub Jet's frail back to remind his tiny brain to keep breathing. I knew the exact, rhythmic sound of the feeding pump finishing its cycle. I was fluent in a language of brachycardia, desaturations, grams, and milliliters. And for 35 agonizing days, my family remained a black, gaping hole of silence. In the beginning, when Jet had a rare good day, I would tentatively send an update to the group chat, desperate for a shred of connection, a single word of encouragement from the people who shared my blood. Jet is officially off the ventilator today. He's breathing with just the CPAP machine. He gained 20 grams, I texted on day 14, tears of relief pricking my eyes. For hours later, my phone buzzed. My father, Alistair, replied. It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't a message of relief, or a question about how I was holding up. It was a single, bright yellow thumbs-up emoji. That was it. A thumbs up. The kind of automated, low-effort response you give when an acquaintance tells you they picked up the dry cleaning or found a good parking spot. Meanwhile, their lives continued as if my son's harrowing fight for survival was nothing more than a mild traffic jam they had successfully bypassed. Through social media, I watched the curated highlight reel of their existence. I watched them attend charity galas in tailored tuxedos, sip expensive wine at exclusive vineyard tastings, and post glossy photos from the VIP box at a local horse racing derby. They were living their perfect, wealthy lives while I was sitting in a hospital cafeteria, eating cold, rubbery toast, waiting to see if my baby would survive the night. The contrast was so sharp, so violently bright, that it physically hurt to breathe. How could they smile so broadly in those photos? How could Greer post about her new interior decorator while knowing I was reading children's books to a baby who couldn't even open his eyes yet? But in that sterile, terrifying environment, isolated from the people who were supposed to love me, I found something I never expected, a real family. There were 3 other mothers whose babies were stationed in the incubators near jets. We were a makeshift sisterhood of exhausted, terrified, fiercely protective women. We shared snacks, we shared tissues, we shared the triumph of a baby taking a bottle for the first time, and most importantly, we shared the heavy, suffocating silence of the NICU. We didn't need to explain our trauma to each other. We were all living in the same trench. And then there was Tamsin. Tamsin was Jet's primary day nurse. She was a no-nonsense, highly skilled veteran of the intensive care unit, a woman who moved with precise, clinical efficiency, but had eyes full of deep, boundless empathy. She saw the way I obsessively checked my phone, the way my shoulders slumped in defeat every time the screen remained dark. She saw the isolation eating me alive, hollowing me out from the inside. One afternoon, on day 28, Jet had a terrifying setback. His oxygen levels plummeted into the dangerous 60s, his skin turning a terrifying shade of dusky blue, and a team of doctors had to rush in to stabilize him. I was pushed out of the room, left to hyperventilate in the hallway, sliding down the wall until I was curled into a ball on the floor. Tamsin found me there 10 minutes later. She sat down right next to me on the dirty linoleum, completely uncaring of the strict hospital protocols regarding professional distance, and handed me a cup of terrible cafeteria coffee. "They didn't come, did they?" she asked softly, her voice barely above a whisper. She didn't need to specify who they were. I shook my head, unable to speak past the heavy lump in my throat, the tears streaming down my face. Tamsin took a sip of her coffee, staring straight ahead at the blank wall. "I've worked in this unit for 15 years, Maeve. I've seen families who have absolutely nothing, who have to take 3 different city buses just to get here, who sleep in the waiting room chairs just to be near their babies. And I've seen families with money to burn who treat this place like a storage facility for their inconveniences." She turned to look me dead in the eye, her gaze piercing. "Family isn't born from blood, Maeve. Blood is just biology. Family is born from presence. The people who show up when the alarms are ringing, the people who sit with you in the dark, those are your people. The rest are just genetics. Don't let their absence define your worth." Her words anchored me. They were a lifeline thrown into a raging sea. They gave me permission to finally let go of the pathetic fantasy I had been holding onto, the fantasy that my father would suddenly become the protector I needed, that my sister would care, that my aunt would show an ounce of basic humanity. By day 35, I had completely stopped checking the group chat. I stopped sending updates. I stopped expecting them to care. I was surviving, fueled by caffeine, Declan's unwavering support, and the fierce, primal love for my tiny son. I was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, mindlessly stirring a cold cup of coffee, staring blankly at the wall. I had reached a state of numb, absolute acceptance. My family was dead to me. And then my phone vibrated violently against the table. It wasn't a text. It was a call. I looked down at the screen. The caller ID flashed with a name that hadn't called me in months. Blair. My golden child sister. I stared at it, confused, my brow furrowing. I let it ring out. 5 seconds later, she called again. And again. And again. I opened my call log, my heart starting to pound against my ribs. 62 missed calls in the span of an hour, while I had my phone on silent during rounds in the NICU. A text popped up on the screen, breaking through the relentless barrage of calls. It was from Blair. "Pick up. It's bad. Why aren't you here?" My stomach dropped. Day 35. I was stirring cold coffee, exhausted to the marrow of my bones. 62 missed calls. The golden child never called me once, let alone 62 times. When I finally answered that phone, the words that came out of her mouth tore down the final, heavy curtain of my family's lies, and the truth I uncovered was more sickening, more calculated, than I could have ever imagined. I stared at the glowing screen, the number 62 mocking me like a neon sign. I swiped the green button to accept the call, my hands trembling slightly. Before I could even manage a raspy "hello," Blair's voice exploded through the tiny speaker, shrill, frantic, and dripping with accusation. "Are you insane, Maeve? Where the hell are you?" she screamed. The background noise on her end was chaotic, the distinct, echoing hum of a busy hospital PA system, the clatter of gurneys, people talking in urgent hushed tones. Blair, what are you talking about? I'm at the hospital with Jet. Where else would I be? I tried to keep my voice steady, but the adrenaline was already flooding my system, chasing away the exhaustion. You need to get to Mass General right now, Blair demanded, ignoring my answer entirely, her voice cracking with a panic I had never heard from her before. It's Aunt Veda. She had a massive stroke this morning. She's in the ICU, Maeve. They don't know if she's going to make it. Aunt Veda. The name hit me like a physical blow to the chest. Veda was the only person in that godforsaken family who had ever shown me a sliver of genuine kindness. She was my father's older sister, the one who was quietly, systematically sidelined by Cressida years ago because Veda refused to play the socialite games and preferred gardening to galas. My breath hitched in my throat. Oh my God. Is she conscious? What did the doctor say? I asked, standing up so fast my plastic chair scraped loudly against the cafeteria floor. Barely, Blair snapped, her tone reverting to its usual haughty impatience. Dad is a wreck. Everyone is here. Cressida, Greer, Dad's business partners. Everyone except you. Dad is literally crying in the hallway asking why his eldest daughter hasn't bothered to show up. You are making a massive scene by not being here, Maeve. It's embarrassing. Stop pouting and get over here. The noisy, bustling cafeteria around me seemed to freeze. The clatter of lunch trays, the murmur of tired residents, all of it faded away into a dull ring in my ears. I gripped the phone so tightly the plastic casing creaked. He's crying. I repeated, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper that didn't sound like my own. He's crying because I'm not there? Yes. He needs you to show support for the family. Blair yelled, clearly frustrated by my lack of immediate obedience. Blair, I said, my voice shaking with a rage so pure, so concentrated, it felt like liquid electricity running through my veins. My son has been fighting for his life in a plastic box for 35 days. He was cut open. He coded. He stopped breathing twice last week. And not one of you, not Greer, and certainly not our father, has stepped foot in this hospital. No one has called. No one has cared. So you tell Dad that I am exactly where I need to be. There was a sudden, jarring silence on the other end of the line. The background noise of Mass General was still there, but Blair's breathing had completely stopped. The frantic energy vanished, replaced by a heavy, confused void. What are you talking about? Blair finally whispered, the harsh edge entirely gone from her voice. Maeve, what do you mean 35 days? He was born a few days ago. Jet has been in the NICU for 5 weeks, Blair. 5 weeks. I send updates to the group chat. I begged for prayers. Nobody came. But that's impossible, Blair stammered. I could hear the rapid clicking of her heels on tile, like she was walking away from a crowd to find a quiet, isolated corridor. Cressida said you were home. She said the baby was fine, just small. Home. I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that echoed off the cafeteria walls. I haven't slept in my own bed for more than 3 hours a night in over a month. I live in a pumping room and a waiting area. Maeve, listen to me. Blair's voice was dropping lower, a sharp edge of real panic creeping in as her lawyer's brain started to process the discrepancies. Cressida told us, she told everyone that you had a total mental breakdown after the birth. She said you were suffering from severe postpartum psychosis. The air left my lungs as if I had been punched in the stomach. I leaned heavily against the cold tile wall to keep my legs from giving out. She said what? She told Dad that the hospital psychiatrists deemed you a danger to yourself and to the baby, Blair explained, speaking rapidly now. She said you were having violent paranoid delusions and that the hospital had mandated a strict, total visitor ban for your own mental stability. She told us we couldn't even text you because it might trigger a psychotic episode. Oh my God, I breathed, the sheer scale of the lie washing over me. She said she was handling it. Blair continued, her voice rising in disbelief. She told Dad she was bringing you specialized meals every day, coordinating with your doctors. She used your depression after the miscarriages as proof that you had snapped. She made Dad believe that staying away was the medical protocol, that he was protecting you by not calling. My vision swam. A clinical, calculated, monstrous lie. Cressida hadn't just ignored me. She had orchestrated a quarantine. She had weaponized my previous traumas, twisting my past grief into a narrative of insanity. She painted me as an unstable, hysterical woman to contain the embarrassment of a messy, premature birth and to keep the family's perfect, stoic image untarnished. She played the benevolent, long-suffering savior, delivering imaginary meals and managing a fake crisis, while I starved for a single ounce of familial love. She lied, Blair. She lied about absolutely everything, I said, my voice shockingly calm. The tears were gone. The victim who had cried herself to sleep for 5 weeks was dead. What remained was a cold, calculating professional who managed crises for a living. I'm coming over, Blair said, her voice shaking. Don't tell anyone we spoke. I'm leaving Mass General right now. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead. I stood in the cafeteria, the phone still pressed to my ear. My aunt had built a heavy, iron cage of lies around me. She thought I was just the pathetic charity worker who would quietly accept her fate and fade away. But Blair, the ruthless corporate lawyer, the golden child who never questioned the family narrative, had just found the crack in the foundation. And she was about to discover a financial secret that would blow this family wide open. Exactly 38 minutes later, the heavy double doors of the NICU waiting area swung violently open. Blair stood there, breathing heavily, her expensive camel hair designer coat thrown hastily over her shoulders, her usually flawless hair slightly disheveled. I hadn't seen her since a brief, awkward family dinner months before Jet was born. She looked exactly the same, polished, sharp, fiercely untouchable. But as her eyes met mine across the room, the pristine, arrogant armor cracked right down the middle. I didn't say a word. I didn't offer a hug. I just turned and swiped my badge, holding the door open to the scrub room. Sleeves up. Scrub up to your elbows with the iodine. 3 full minutes. Don't touch anything after you dry them, I instructed, my voice flat, authoritative, and completely devoid of emotion. Blair obeyed silently, which was perhaps the most shocking thing she had ever done. She pumped the harsh soap and scrubbed her arms until the skin was pink and raw, her eyes darting nervously around the sterile, intimidating environment. When the digital timer chimed, I led her through the second set of doors into the main room. The mechanical hum of dozens of machines, the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors, the smell of sterile wipes, it was overwhelming. We walked past rows of incubators until we reached the quiet, dim corner where Jet was fighting his daily battle. Blair stopped dead in her tracks. She stared at the tiny, fragile body covered in a chaotic nest of wires. The large CPAP mask obscured most of his face, the blue light of the jaundice therapy glowing unnaturally against his almost translucent skin. For the first time in her 31 years of life, the golden child of the family was completely speechless. Her manicured hands hovered over the clear plastic casing, trembling violently. He's so small, she choked out, a single tear escaping and ruining her perfect, expensive mascara. Oh my God, Maeve. He's so small. He was smaller, I said, standing beside her, crossing my arms. He weighed 2 pounds when they cut him out of me. So tell me, where is the psychosis, Blair? Do you see a padded room? Do you see a team of psychiatrists restraining me? Blair shook her head slowly, pulling her hand back and covering her mouth. The brutal reality of Cressida's lie was standing right in front of her, breathing in shallow, labored, mechanical gasps. I didn't know, Blair whispered, turning to me, her face pale and stricken with guilt. I swear to God, Maeve. I didn't know. She showed Dad fake emails from a doctor at this hospital. She had printed out medical journals about postpartum psychosis and highlighted the symptoms. She played him perfectly. Why? I asked, my professional instincts entirely taking over. In my line of work, investigating federal grant fraud, a lie this elaborate wasn't just about saving face at a country club. It took effort. It took planning. People don't go to this extreme length just to avoid visiting a sick baby. What is she hiding, Blair? Blair's eyes widened, the sharp, analytical intellect of the corporate lawyer suddenly snapping into focus through the haze of shock. She grabbed my arm and pulled me away from the incubators, dragging me back toward the soundproof waiting room. "The trust," Blair said, her voice dropping to a harsh, urgent whisper once the doors closed safely behind us. "Oh my God, the grandfather trust." I frowned, confused. "What trust?" "Grandpa left everything to Dad and Cressida when he died." "We didn't get anything." "No, he didn't," Blair said, pacing the small beige room like a caged tiger. "He left a generation-skipping trust. $2.5 million for each of his grandchildren, locked in high-yield accounts until we turn 35 or experience a qualifying life event." Having a child is a qualifying event, Maeve. My mind raced, struggling to catch up. I'm 34. Jet is the qualifying event. I should have access to it. Exactly. Blair stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes burning with a toxic mix of horror and dawning realization. "But there's a contingency clause. I reviewed the foundational documents years ago when I started at the law firm. If a beneficiary is legally deemed mentally incapacitated or a documented danger to their dependents, the trustee, which is Cressida, gains full, unchecked discretionary control over the disbursement of those funds. She can legally absorb it into the main estate." The floor felt like it was dropping out from under me. It wasn't just about image. It was about theft. Grand larceny masquerading as family concern. "She convinced Dad you were insane so she could trigger the incapacity clause without anyone questioning it," Blair explained, her voice shaking with rage. "She was building a paper trail. The fake doctor emails, the mandated isolation. She was setting you up to be declared unfit so she could quietly absorb your $2.5 million back into her own accounts." A cold, terrifying calm washed over me, chilling my blood. Cressida had weaponized my mental health, isolated me from my family when I was most vulnerable, and left me to drown in the darkest time of my life, all to steal my inheritance. "She messed with the wrong woman," I said softly, pulling my phone from my pocket. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It wasn't a family member. It was Nash. Nash was a senior forensic accountant and my right-hand man at the nonprofit. We had spent the last 5 years tearing down corrupt organizations, auditing fraudulent charities, and putting embezzlers behind bars. He was a shark in a tailored suit, a man who could find a missing dollar in a haystack of offshore shell accounts. He answered on the second ring. "Maeve. Tell me you're finally sleeping." "Nash, I need a favor." "A massive one," I said, my voice dead steady. "I need you to run a shadow audit on my family's charitable foundation. Specifically, I need the expense reports for the trustee Cressida." "Your aunt?" "The Boston socialite," Nash asked, his tone instantly shifting into serious work mode. I could hear him typing. "Give me 20 minutes. I hung up and looked at Blair. The golden child and the invisible outcast, finally standing side by side on the same side of the battlefield. "Ditagi chi la mot konbi bat tai chi beat xintn2tn," I said, a bitter, dangerous smile crossing my face. "She doesn't know that my pathetic little charity just secured a $50 million federal grant. And she doesn't know that Nash is the man who sends people exactly like her to federal prison." Blair's eyes lit up with a vicious, predatory gleam that matched my own. "What do you need me to do?" The trap needed to be flawless. It needed to be airtight, legally sound, brutal, and public enough that Cressida could never spin the narrative or gaslight her way out of it again. I wasn't just going to expose her lie to my father. I was going to systematically dismantle her entire financial and social empire. Exactly 22 minutes after I called him, Nash sent a highly encrypted, secure file to my phone. I opened it, my eyes scanning the highlighted transactions. Nash was a savant. He hadn't just found the Foundation's general ledgers. He had dug through the shell companies and found Cressida's personal expense account. The one she falsely claimed to the IRS was a medical emergency reserve fund for the charity's beneficiaries. And there it was. A glaring line item from 3 days ago. A charge at a high-end, exclusive Boston jeweler for exactly $90,000. But as I scrolled down, my blood ran cold. It got infinitely worse. The account she drew the money from wasn't just a general slush fund. It was a dedicated, tax-free medical reserve set up explicitly for Aunt Veda's long-term care needs. Cressida had stolen from her own sister, a woman currently fighting for her life on a ventilator in the ICU, to buy a diamond watch while my son was having his stomach cut open. "Got it," I whispered, holding the screen up for Blair to see. Blair leaned in, reading the financial codes. She covered her mouth, her face turning an ashen white. She stole from Veda. She drained Veda's care fund. She's literally wearing Veda's life support on her wrist. "She's a monster," I said, my voice cold, detached, and utterly devoid of mercy. "And it's time to slay her." We formulated the execution plan in less than 10 minutes. Blair was going to drive back to Mass General Hospital. She was going to walk into Aunt Veda's room, act completely normal, apologize for her absence, and ensure that Alistair, Greer, and Cressida were all present in the room together. Meanwhile, I was going to set up the execution chamber right here in the NICU. "When you have them all in the room, when they are settled, send me a text," I instructed Blair, looking her dead in the eye. "I'll initiate a video call to your phone. Answer it and cast it to the smart TV in Veda's room if you can. Do not let her leave." Blair nodded, her jaw set so tight a muscle ticked in her cheek. "I'll lock the damn door if I have to." She rushed out of the hospital, her heels clicking rapidly fading down the hall, leaving me alone with the quiet hum of the monitors. Tamsin, who had been watching our intense interaction from the nurse's station, walked over with a rolling medical tray. "Everything okay, Maeve?" "That looked intense," she asked gently, eyeing my rigid posture. "Tamsin, can I borrow your personal laptop for a few minutes?" I asked. "I need a bigger screen. I have a family meeting." Tamsin didn't ask any further questions. She saw the absolute fire in my eyes, the shift from a grieving mother to a woman going to war. She simply nodded, bringing over a sleek laptop and setting it up on the tray. I positioned it perfectly. I didn't want them to just see my face. I wanted them to see the undeniable reality they had so casually ignored. I angled the webcam so that Jet's incubator was perfectly framed in the background, the nest of wires, the feeding tubes, the glaring blue bilirubin lights. It was an irrefutable, heartbreaking image of truth. I sat down in the hard plastic chair and waited. The clock on the wall ticked agonizingly slow. 7 p.m. 7:30. The adrenaline was making my hands shake slightly, but my mind was a calm, crystal-clear lake of focus. I was no longer the grieving, isolated, invisible daughter. I was the crisis management director, and I was about to handle the biggest, most explosive crisis of my family's life. At exactly 8:15, my phone buzzed on the tray. A single text message from Blair. "The fish is in the net. Make the call." I took a deep, steadying breath, smoothing down my wrinkled, coffee-stained shirt. I pulled up the video conferencing software, entered Blair's email, and hit the green call button. The screen displayed connecting. For 5 agonizing seconds, I stared at my own reflection in the dark screen, barely recognizing the woman looking back at me. She was fierce. She was dangerous. She was done playing the victim. The screen flickered to life, and suddenly, I was looking at the sterile, beige walls of Aunt Veda's VIP room at Mass General. The camera shook slightly as Blair adjusted her phone, propping it up on a bedside table to capture the whole room. And there they were. My father, Alistair, looking appropriately exhausted in a wrinkled suit, standing by the window. Greer, sitting in a leather chair, mindlessly scrolling on her phone. And in the dead center of the frame, standing tall with her arms crossed in an authoritative pose, was Cressida. She looked pristine, her hair perfectly coiffed, her makeup flawless. And right there, gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hospital room, was the $90,000 Rolex on her wrist. They hadn't noticed the connection yet. Blair stepped back, clearing her throat loudly to command the room. "Dad," Cressida, Blair said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room. "Someone wants to talk to you." Alistair turned around, his brow furrowing in confusion. Cressida sighed, clearly annoyed by the interruption to her performative vigil. They both looked toward the phone screen. I watched the exact moment the realization hit them. I watched Alistair's eyes widen in sheer terror, his jaw dropping in absolute shock. I watched Greer gasp, her phone clattering to the floor. But most importantly, I watched Cressida's mask slip. The confident, untouchable matriarch flinched violently, her face draining of all color, her eyes starting like a trapped rat. The trap was set. The audience was captive. The curtain was about to rise. "Hello, family," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence of the room like a perfectly sharpened scalpel. "Hello, family," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy, suffocating silence of the room like a perfectly sharpened scalpel. For 5 endless, agonizing seconds, nobody breathed. The only sound filtering through the video call was the rhythmic, mechanical hiss of Jet's ventilator in the background on my end. My father, Alistair, stood frozen by the large hospital window at Mass General, his face a canvas of pure, unadulterated shock. He looked at the screen, then squinted, as if his brain was violently rejecting the digital image in front of him. Greer had both hands clamped tightly over her mouth, her eyes wide with a sudden, dawning terror. But it was Cressida who reacted first. The untouchable matriarch, the woman who had orchestrated my living nightmare with the precision of a military general, felt her iron grip on reality slipping. Her eyes darted frantically toward the closed door of the room, then back to the screen. The flawless, aristocratic mask of composure she had worn for decades shattered into a million jagged pieces right before my eyes. "Turn that off," Cressida snapped, her voice shrill and trembling, pointing a manicured finger at Blair's phone which was casting to the television. "Alistair, tell Blair to turn that off right this second. She is having a psychotic episode. We are not supposed to engage with her delusions. The doctors were very clear about this. Turn it off before she hurts herself." She was doing it again. Right to my face, with zero hesitation. She was attempting to gaslight the entire room in real time, relying on her decades of unchecked authority and financial leverage to crush the truth. She truly believed that if she just spoke loudly enough, with enough false authority, reality would bend to her will. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't desperately defend my sanity or beg my father to believe me. I simply reached forward, grabbed the sides of Tamsin's laptop, and slowly, deliberately rotated the camera away from my own face. I aimed the high-definition lens directly at the clear plastic incubator sitting in the dim corner of the room. I made sure the webcam captured every single devastating, heartbreaking detail of my reality. I showed them the tiny, translucent body of my son. I showed them the massive CPAP mask covering half his face, forcibly pushing oxygen into his fragile, underdeveloped lungs. I showed them the chaotic nest of monitoring wires taped to his chest, the feeding tube snaking through his nose, and the harsh, glaring blue bilirubin lights illuminating his paper-thin skin. "Look at him," I commanded, my voice echoing through the speakers in Aunt Veda's hospital room, carrying the weight of 35 days of pure hell. "Take a very good look, Dad. This is your grandson. This is Jet. He is 5 weeks old. He weighs 2 pounds and 1 ounce. He had his stomach cut open yesterday to save his life. And for 35 days, he has fought for his existence entirely alone. Because you left him here." Alistair took a stumbling, uncoordinated step forward, his hands reaching out toward the television screen as if he could somehow touch the baby through the digital feed. His face crumbled, the strong, stoic jawline giving way to a quivering mess of regret. The powerful, self-made real estate mogul looked suddenly frail, ancient, and utterly broken. "Maeve," my father choked out, heavy tears spilling over his eyelashes and tracking rapidly down his weathered cheeks. "Oh my God. Maeve, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know he was like this. She told me he was fine, just small. She told me you were sick." "You believed a lie," I replied, the ice in my veins freezing every word before it left my mouth. "You believed I was crazy because it was easier than picking up the phone and calling the hospital yourself. It was easier to let Cressida handle the messy, inconvenient, disappointing daughter while you went to polo matches and charity galas. You didn't want to know the truth, Dad, because the truth is ugly and uncomfortable. She is manipulating you, Alistair. Cressida practically shrieked, stepping directly into the center of the frame, trying to physically block the screen with her body. She is unstable. She sneaked into that ward. We had a firm agreement to protect this family's reputation from her hysterical outbursts. Do you want her ruining everything we have built? Protecting the family? I asked, a dark, humorless laugh escaping my lips, a sound that made even me shiver. Is that what you call it, Cressida? Tell me, how did it feel when you were on that brightly lit stage at the Children's Hospital Charity Gala last week? When you were smiling for the cameras and accepting applause for your endless generosity, did you think about my son suffocating on a ventilator just 3 miles away? I did what had to be done. Cressida roared, her pristine composure entirely gone, replaced by a vicious, cornered fury. You have always been a massive liability, Maeve. You work a pathetic, bottom-feeding job for pennies. You married a blue-collar worker. You are a permanent stain on this family's legacy. I was protecting our good name from your poverty, your constant failures, and your endless, exhausting drama. The room went dead silent. The ugly, rotten, festering core of her soul was finally exposed for everyone to see under the harsh fluorescent lights. She didn't just hate me, she despised my very existence because I didn't worship at the altar of their wealth. She viewed my pain as an infectious disease that needed to be quarantined. I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying, predatory smile that made Greer visibly flinch on the screen and take a step back. Poverty, I repeated, letting the word hang heavily in the air, tasting the sheer irony of it. A stain on the legacy. That is a very interesting choice of words, Aunt Cressida. Especially coming from a common thief. Cressida froze, her manicured hands dropping to her sides, her eyes narrowing into dangerous, calculating slits. Excuse me? How dare you speak to me that way? You are nothing. Oh, I dare, I said softly, leaning into the microphone. Because you see, you made a fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. You thought I was just a powerless, weeping charity worker. You thought you could lock me away behind a fake medical diagnosis and steal my future while I was too busy crying to notice. But you are about to find out exactly what I do for a living. That was the exact sentence I had been waiting to deliver for a decade. I turned my head toward the heavy double doors of the NICU waiting room and gave a short, sharp nod. It was time to unleash the hounds. The heavy doors to the waiting room opened with a soft hiss. Nash walked into the frame of the webcam, carrying a thick, heavily tabbed manila folder. He was dressed in a sharp, impeccably tailored charcoal suit, looking every bit the ruthless, terrifying forensic accountant he was. But he wasn't alone. Walking right behind him, exuding an aura of absolute, uncompromising authority, was a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair and a stern face. It was Judge William Harrison. He was a retired federal judge who currently sat on the elite board of directors for my nonprofit organization. He was a man of immense power, unimpeachable integrity, and he despised financial corruption more than anything in the world. He was the kind of man who could freeze a courtroom with a single glance. Nash set the laptop on a wider medical tray table, adjusting the camera angle so that all three of us were clearly in the frame, with Jet's glowing incubator still visible in the background, serving as the undeniable anchor of truth for this entire confrontation. Who the hell are these people? Cressida demanded, her voice wavering as genuine panic began to set in. She recognized real power and authority when she saw it, and Judge Harrison radiated it effortlessly. Allow me to introduce myself, Madam, Judge Harrison said, his deep, booming voice echoing through the call and commanding the room at Mass General. I am Judge William Harrison. I sit on the Executive Oversight Committee for the National Crisis Relief Foundation, the exact organization where your niece, Maeve, serves as the Senior Director of Federal Grants and Compliance. Alistair looked up, blinking rapidly, his tear-stained face twisting in confusion. Director of Federal Grants? Maeve, you always told us you filed paperwork for homeless shelters. No, Dad, I corrected him, my eyes locked dead on Cressida's pale face. Cressida told you I filed paperwork because it fit her narrative of my pathetic life. I manage a $70 million annual federal budget. I investigate severe grant fraud. I hunt down people who steal money from the vulnerable. People exactly like my beloved aunt. I nodded to Nash. He opened the manila folder, the sound of the crisp, heavy paper deafening in the tense, breathless silence of the video call. Let's talk about the grandfather trust, Cressida, Nash began, his tone entirely conversational, which somehow made the impending destruction vastly more terrifying. $2.5 million allocated to Maeve upon the birth of her first child. You filed emergency legal paperwork 3 weeks ago to have Maeve declared mentally incapacitated, citing severe postpartum psychosis and violent delusions. Nash held up a thick legal document, holding it close to the camera. Cressida's elegant, sweeping signature was clearly visible at the bottom of the page. You used fabricated emails from a non-existent hospital psychiatrist to intentionally trigger the incapacity clause, Nash continued, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. Your ultimate goal was to legally absorb Maeve's $2.5 million into your own discretionary estate accounts. Unfortunately for you, I flagged the suspicious transfer yesterday morning. The funds are currently frozen by the Federal Banking Commission pending a full criminal investigation for wire fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. Cressida's face drained of all color, leaving her looking like a hollow wax figure. She opened her mouth to speak, to deny it, to spin another desperate web of lies to save her skin, but no sound came out. She was literally suffocating on her own arrogance. But that is just the appetizer, Auntie, I said, leaning closer to the camera, refusing to let her look away. Let's talk about your left wrist, Cressida. Let's talk about that beautiful, shiny, diamond-encrusted Rolex you texted me a picture of while my son was coding on an operating table. Cressida instinctively grabbed her left wrist with her right hand, trying in vain to cover the massive watch, pulling her sleeve down in a futile gesture of self-preservation. Nash flipped to the next tabbed page in the thick folder. 3 days ago, a wire transfer of exactly $90,000 was sent from the Boston Family Charitable Foundation to an exclusive, high-end jeweler downtown. The funds were pulled directly from a highly restricted, tax-exempt medical reserve account. Alistair gasped loudly, turning slowly to look at his sister, his eyes wide with a horrifying realization. Tell him whose account it was, Nash, I said, my voice dropping to a harsh, unforgiving whisper. It was the dedicated long-term care fund for Veda, Nash stated clearly, reading directly from the bank statement. You drained your own sister's emergency medical fund while she was lying in a hospital bed recovering from a massive stroke, just so you could buy a watch and take a picture of it in first class. The silence that followed was apocalyptic. It was the distinct, heavy sound of an entire family dynasty crumbling into fine dust. Alistair stared at Cressida's wrist, his eyes burning with a mixture of profound horror, disgust, and sickening realization. The woman he had trusted with the family legacy, the woman who had convinced him his own daughter was insane, was nothing more than a common thief stealing from their sick, defenseless sister. It's a lie, Cressida finally croaked, taking a stumbling step backward until she hit the wall. They are fabricating these documents to ruin me. Alistair, you cannot believe this. She is trying to destroy our family. Oh, the documents are incredibly real, I assure you, Judge Harrison interjected, crossing his arms over his chest. But I am actually here tonight for a different reason entirely. Your so-called charitable foundation recently submitted an extensive application for a $5 million state grant to expand your operations. You claimed the funds were desperately needed for disaster relief and community outreach. Cressida swallowed hard, her eyes darting nervously toward the imposing judge. The irony of this situation is truly staggering, Judge Harrison said, shaking his head in sheer disgust. Because the state committee reviewing that specific grant application is chaired by none other than Maeve. You have spent years publicly humiliating her, calling her a bottom feeder, treating her like dirt on your expensive shoe. And yet, she is the very person holding the pen that decides the financial fate of your beloved foundation. Cressida looked at me, her eyes wide with a primal, suffocating terror. The power dynamic hadn't just shifted, it had entirely, permanently inverted. She was standing at the bottom of a very deep, very dark hole, and I was the one holding the shovel, looking down at her. Application firmly denied, Cressida, I said softly. Cressida looked frantically around the room at Mass General, desperately searching for a lifeline, an ally, anyone who would help her reassert control and twist the narrative back in her favor. She turned to Alistair, reaching out to grab his arm, her eyes pleading. But the real, fatal blow didn't come from me or my team. It came from the person standing right next to her. Alistair violently yanked his arm away from Cressida's desperate grasp, as if her skin was covered in burning battery acid. He stumbled backward, putting as much physical distance between them as possible, bumping hard into Greer, who was openly weeping in the corner of the room, her hands covering her face. My father looked at his sister with a level of pure, unadulterated disgust I had never seen on his face before. "Don't you ever touch me again," Alistair growled, his voice vibrating with a raw, guttural fury that shook the room. "You stole from Veda. You stole from Maeve. You kept me away from my own grandson while he was fighting for his life. You are a monster." "Alistair, please, you have to listen to me. We have to keep this quiet," Cressida pleaded, her voice dropping into a desperate, frantic whisper, still trying to manage the optics of the situation. "We can fix this internally. We can replace the funds. If this gets out to the public, the family name will be ruined forever. The foundation will be destroyed. Think of the legacy. Think of what our father built. To hell with the legacy." Alistair roared, the sound echoing so loudly the phone microphone crackled and distorted. "There is no legacy left. It's just rot." While Cressida was busy begging my father for a shred of mercy, Blair stepped forward from the shadows of the hospital room. The golden child, the ruthless corporate attorney who had always played blindly by Cressida's rules, slowly opened her expensive, monogrammed leather briefcase. Her face was a mask of cold, calculating precision. "The legacy is already dead, Aunt Cressida," Blair said, her voice eerily calm and entirely professional. She reached into the briefcase and pulled out a thick, heavy stack of legal documents printed on official, watermarked paper. She walked right up to Cressida and pressed the documents firmly against her chest, holding them there until Cressida was forced to raise her trembling hands and take them. "What is this?" Cressida demanded, her hands shaking so badly the heavy paper rattled against each other. "Consider yourself officially served," Blair announced, stepping back and folding her arms across her chest, staring down the woman she used to idolize. "That is an emergency, court-ordered restraining order filed on behalf of Maeve, Declan, and Jet. You are legally forbidden from coming within 500 feet of them, their home, or this hospital. If you violate it, if you so much as send a text message, I will personally see to it that you are arrested on the spot and held without bail." Cressida stared at the legal papers, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish pulled from the water. "Blair, you are my attorney. You represent the family foundation. You can't do this to me. It's a conflict of interest." "I resigned as the foundation's counsel exactly 20 minutes ago," Blair replied, a cold, vicious smile spreading across her face. "And there is a second document in that stack, right beneath the restraining order. It is a formal, legal notice of a comprehensive federal audit. I handed over every single financial record, every hidden ledger, and every offshore account file to the authorities on my way back to this hospital. The IRS and the FBI are currently dismantling your entire operation as we speak." Cressida let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. It was a wretched, pathetic noise. It was the sound of a tyrant realizing her untouchable kingdom had been burned to the ground by the very people she thought she controlled. She collapsed backward into the nearest vinyl hospital chair, the legal documents spilling out of her hands and scattering onto the floor around her. The $90,000 Rolex caught the harsh fluorescent hospital light as she buried her face in her hands, weeping loudly. "But we aren't quite finished yet," I said through the screen, making sure she heard every single word of her own destruction. "You cared so deeply about your public image, Cressida. You cared about what the wealthy board of directors at the Children's Hospital thought of you. You loved playing the generous, selfless benefactor at their high society galas. Cressida looked up, her expensive mascara running down her face in dark, ugly, jagged streaks, making her look like a ruined painting. "What else did you do?" Tamsin, the veteran NICU nurse who had been standing quietly off-camera this entire time, leaned into the frame, her face brightly lit by the monitor. "Hi there," Tamsin said cheerfully, though her eyes were made of pure, unforgiving steel. "Hospital protocol strictly prohibits recording inside the NICU without written consent. We take privacy very seriously here. However, the hallway right outside the family waiting room is technically a public space. And earlier today, Maeve had me record a certain phone call on my personal device." My aunt's eyes widened in sheer horror as her brain caught up to the timeline, realizing exactly which unhinged phone call Tamsin was talking about. "The one where you screamed at the top of your lungs about me being a massive liability, a stain on the family, and mocked my poverty while explicitly admitting you locked me away in a fake psych ward just to protect your reputation," I clarified, leaning back in my chair, feeling a profound sense of closure wash over me. "I sent that pristine audio file directly to the chief administrator of the hospital board 10 minutes ago," Tamsin continued, her cheerful smile never wavering for a second. "They take the emotional abuse of fragile NICU mothers extremely seriously. Your name is being physically stripped from the gold donor wall in the main lobby as we speak, and you are permanently banned from all future hospital events. Have a wonderful evening, ma'am." Tamsin stepped back, crossing her arms in sheer, undeniable satisfaction. Cressida was entirely destroyed. Her stolen money was frozen, her extensive crimes were reported to federal authorities, her family had abandoned her in a matter of minutes, and her precious, carefully curated social standing was permanently obliterated. She was nothing more than a common criminal in a ruined designer dress, sitting in the ashes of her own making. She looked around the room, desperately searching the faces of her family for a shred of pity, a single ounce of sympathy. She found absolutely none. Blair glared at her with righteous, unblinking fury. Greer refused to even look in her direction, staring at the floor. And my father looked at her as if she were a total stranger, a disease he had just been cured of. "Get out," Alistair said softly, the quiet, broken command carrying vastly more weight than if he had screamed it. "Alistair, please, you are my brother." "I said get out," he bellowed, pointing a shaking, furious finger toward the door of the hospital room. "Get out of Veda's room. Get out of our lives. You are dead to me." Cressida stood up on trembling, weak legs. She didn't bother picking up the scattered legal documents from the floor. She gathered her designer purse, her shoulders slumped in absolute, crushing defeat, and walked out of the hospital room without looking back. The heavy wooden door clicked shut behind her, sealing her fate forever. The silence returned to the room, but this time, it wasn't suffocating or heavy with unspoken lies. It was clear. It was clean. The deep, festering infection had finally been excised from our family tree. Alistair slowly turned back to the phone screen. He looked at me, then he looked past me, his tired eyes settling on the tiny, fragile incubator glowing in the background. The powerful, unyielding patriarch was gone. What remained was a broken, deeply remorseful old man who had nearly lost his eldest daughter forever. He felt his knees right there on the hard hospital floor, ignoring Greer's shocked gasp, and pressed his hands tightly over his face, sobbing uncontrollably. "I am so sorry," Alistair sobbed, his voice cracking with the unbearable weight of decades of failure as a father. "Maeve, I am so incredibly sorry. I failed you. I let her poison my mind. I let her push you away for years because it was easier than standing up to her. Please, please tell me it isn't too late. Let me come see my grandson. Let me try to fix this." I watched my father weep on the cold tile floor of Aunt Veda's hospital room. A small, buried part of me, the little girl who had spent 34 years begging for his validation and approval, wanted to cry with him. I wanted to tell him everything was fine, that all was instantly forgiven, that we could start over right this second and be a perfect, happy family. But I wasn't that fragile little girl anymore. I was a mother forged in the fires of the NICU. I was a survivor of their systemic emotional abuse. And I had learned the hard, brutal way that forgiveness is not a right automatically granted by shared blood. It is a profound privilege that must be earned through consistent, undeniable action over time. I leaned forward, my face filling the screen. I did not soften my expression. I did not offer a warm, comforting smile. I maintained the cold, professional, unyielding authority of a woman who is fully, undeniably in control of her own life and the safety of her child. "You can come," I said, my voice steady, cutting through his tears. "But hear me very clearly, Dad. The rules of engagement have permanently changed. The old dynamic is dead." Alistair looked up, wiping his wet eyes with the back of his expensive suit sleeve, nodding frantically. "Anything. Whatever you want, Maeve. Just tell me what to do." "You do not dictate the terms anymore," I stated, laying down the absolute law. "You will drive to this hospital. You will wait in the downstairs lobby until I decide I am ready to come down and get you. When you enter this unit, you will leave your phone, your expensive watch, and your wallet at the front desk. This is not a photo opportunity for your social media. This is not a PR stunt to ease your crushing guilt. You will scrub your arms with iodine soap for 3 full minutes until your skin is raw. You will stand by that incubator in absolute silence, and you will understand exactly what this tiny child has endured while you were busy living your perfect, ignorant life." "I understand," Alistair whispered, his voice thick with heavy tears. "I promise, Maeve. I will do exactly as you say. And if you ever," I continued, my eyes narrowing into a fierce glare, "ever try to minimize my life, my career, or my husband again, if you ever allow anyone to speak down to me in your presence, you will never see Jet's face again. You will be permanently cut out of our lives, just like Cressida. Is that entirely clear?" "Crystal clear," he said, swallowing hard, bowing his head in submission. "Good. I will see you in an hour," I said. I didn't wait for a goodbye. I reached over and ended the video call, the screen snapping to black, plunging the corner of the waiting room into quiet shadows. I sat back in the hard plastic chair, exhaling a massive, shuddering breath that felt like I had been holding in my lungs for 35 days. The adrenaline suddenly crashed, leaving me dizzy, shaking, and exhausted down to the marrow of my bones. But underneath the immense fatigue was a profound, unshakable sense of peace. The heavy, invisible chain that had tied me to their toxic expectations and conditional love was finally, permanently severed. Declan walked into the waiting room a moment later, carrying 2 fresh cups of terrible hospital coffee. He took one look at my face, read the shift in my posture, set the coffee down on a table, and pulled me into a fierce, grounding, all-encompassing hug. "It's over," I whispered into his shoulder, the tears finally coming, but this time, they weren't tears of sorrow or isolation. They were tears of immense relief and victory. "We won, Declan. They can't hurt us anymore." The aftermath of that explosive night was swift, brutal, and devastating for Cressida. The federal audit Nash initiated uncovered years of massive, systematic embezzlement. She had been siphoning money from federal charitable grants, evading taxes, and draining family trust accounts to illegally fund her lavish, high-society lifestyle. 2 weeks after our confrontation, she was formally indicted by a federal grand jury on multiple counts of fraud. She lost her sprawling mansion, her luxury cars, and her entire social standing overnight. The woman who had terrified and controlled our family for decades was reduced to a pathetic cautionary tale printed in the local Boston newspapers. Alistair and Greer arrived at the NICU exactly 1 hour after the video call ended. They looked shattered, humbled, and terrified. They followed every single one of my strict rules without a single word of complaint or hesitation. I watched my father, a man who had only ever cared about outward appearances and projecting strength, stand over Jet's incubator with his bare, scrubbed arms, weeping silently at the sight of his tiny, fighting grandson. It wasn't an instant fix. His tears didn't magically erase 34 years of neglect and conditional love. But it was a genuine, humble beginning on my strict terms. After 10 long, grueling, terrifying weeks in the hospital, Jet finally hit the required medical milestones. He learned to breathe entirely on his own. He gained enough weight to regulate his temperature, and his fragile heart rate stabilized. The day we carried him out of those heavy double doors in his tiny, heavily padded car seat, Tamsin stood at the nurse's station and clapped loudly, tears shining in her eyes. We were finally going home. But the story didn't truly end there. Because family dynamics, especially toxic ones that have festered for decades, do not simply disappear overnight. The real, defining test of our new reality happened a few months later, on a bright Saturday afternoon, right at my own front door. We decided to hold Jet's first birthday party in our modest, cozy 3-bedroom house in the suburbs. It wasn't a lavish, catered affair at a stuffy country club. There were no expensive ice sculptures, no professional photographers trying to capture the perfect candid shot, and no wealthy business partners trying to network over flutes of expensive champagne. It was loud, it was wonderfully messy, and it was overflowing with genuine, unconditional love. The living room was brightly decorated with cheap, colorful paper streamers and mismatched balloons. Declan was out in the backyard, laughing loudly as he burned hot dogs on a charcoal grill. Jet, now a fiercely resilient, incredibly energetic 1-year-old with a messy mop of brown hair and a belly laugh that could cure any sadness, was sitting in the middle of the kitchen floor, aggressively destroying a small blue smash cake with his bare hands. I stood by the kitchen counter, leaning comfortably against the doorframe, sipping a generic soda and just watching the beautiful, chaotic scene unfold before me. My real family, my chosen family, was all there. Tamsin, who had become a permanent, cherished fixture in our lives, was sitting on the couch, bouncing one of Jet's stuffed animals and making silly faces. The 3 incredible NICU moms I had bonded with during those dark, terrifying days were sitting on a picnic blanket in the yard, chasing after their own healthy, growing miracle babies. We shared a bond forged in fire that could never be broken. Blair was sitting cross-legged on the carpet right next to Jet, wearing a simple pair of faded jeans and a plain t-shirt, an outfit I never thought I would see the elite corporate lawyer wear in public. She was currently covered in sticky blue frosting, laughing hysterically as Jet tried to feed her a handful of crushed cake. Since the hospital incident, Blair had fundamentally changed. Without Cressida's toxic, competitive influence constantly pitting us against each other for scraps of approval, we had spent the last year actually getting to know one another. We were slowly, carefully building a real sisterhood from the ground up. Aunt Veda, who had made a slow but miraculous physical recovery from her stroke, was sitting in a comfortable padded armchair, sipping iced tea and watching Jet with soft, deeply loving eyes. And then there was my father and Greer. They were sitting on the floor in the corner of the room, far away from the center of attention, quietly and patiently helping Jet unwrap a brightly colored wooden train set. They weren't holding court. They weren't loudly bragging about their latest real estate acquisitions or trying to dominate the conversation. They were just present, incredibly humble, and deeply, visibly grateful to be included in our lives. The doorbell rang sharply, cutting through the warm sound of laughter and upbeat music. I wiped my sticky hands on a dish towel and walked toward the front entryway. When I opened the heavy wooden door, the relaxed smile instantly faded from my face. Standing on my front porch, flanked closely by 2 burly private security guards hired by our neighborhood association, was Cressida. She was a haunting ghost of her former self. The designer gowns and the aura of superiority were entirely gone, replaced by a cheap, wrinkled trench coat and nervous, darting eyes. Her hair was unkempt, lacking its usual perfect blowout, and the arrogant, untouchable fire that used to burn in her eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a desperate, hollow, suffocating panic. She was currently out on bail, awaiting federal sentencing for her financial crimes, and she looked every bit the ruined, desperate criminal she was. "Maeve," Cressida croaked, her voice raspy, taking a hesitant step forward before the larger security guard put a massive hand firmly on her shoulder, stopping her dead in her tracks. "Please. I just wanted to bring a small gift for the baby. I just want to see the family for a minute." She held up a small, poorly wrapped box with shaking hands. It was a pathetic, transparently desperate attempt to claw her way back into the fold, to find someone, anyone, who would validate her existence and pretend she wasn't entirely alone in the world. I looked at her, feeling a strange, unexpected mix of mild pity and absolute, unwavering disgust. I didn't feel the old, paralyzing fear anymore. She had absolutely no power over me. She was just a sad, toxic, broken woman who had systematically destroyed her own life through endless greed and calculated cruelty. "You don't have a family here, Cressida," I said, my voice perfectly calm and entirely devoid of anger. "You threw your family away for a shiny watch and a hidden bank account. You are a complete stranger to my son, and you will remain a stranger to him for the rest of his life." "I am your blood," she screamed, a sudden flash of her old, entitled fury breaking through the pathetic desperation. "You cannot do this to me. I am your aunt. You have to forgive me." "Blood is just a biological accident," I replied, stepping back into the warmth of my house and preparing to close the door. "Family is an earned privilege, and your privileges have been permanently, irrevocably revoked. Take her away from my property, please." I nodded to the security guards. They firmly grasped Cressida by the arms and began leading her down the concrete driveway. She screamed, she cried, she loudly cursed my name, but I simply closed the heavy door, locked the brass deadbolt, and walked back into the warmth and safety of my home. I sat down on the floor next to Declan, pulling Jet into my lap, entirely uncaring that he immediately smeared blue frosting all over my clean shirt. I looked around the room at this beautiful, patchwork group of people who loved us. We are all taught from a very young age that family is an unconditional, unbreakable obligation. We are told by society that we must forgive every slight, endure every insult, and swallow our pain because blood is thicker than water. But that is a dangerous lie designed to keep toxic people in positions of power. Walking away from a toxic, abusive blood relative is not an act of failure. It is not an act of cruelty or selfishness. It is the most courageous, necessary act of self-preservation you will ever commit. It is the exact moment you finally decide that your peace, your sanity, and the safety of your children are vastly more important than protecting the feelings of the people who repeatedly hurt you. When I looked into the bright, happy eyes of my son, gently running a finger over the tiny, faded surgical scar on his chest, I knew with absolute certainty that I had made the right choice. I burned down the toxic empire to keep my baby warm, and I would do it 1,000 times over without a second of hesitation. Some people, the enablers and the flying monkeys of the world, might say I went too far. They might say I was too ruthless in destroying my aunt's life, that pushing my own flesh and blood into federal prison was a step over the line. But I want to ask you a question. When a predator smiles in your face while stealing your future, when they leave you to drown in your darkest hour just to protect their own vanity, are you really supposed to just turn the other cheek? Am I wrong for seeking justice, or does a monster wearing a designer dress still deserve to be treated exactly like a monster? Have you ever had to draw a hard line and redefine what family means to you? Who is your chosen family, the people who actually showed up when the alarms were ringing in your life? Please share your stories and experiences in the comments below. I read every single one of them, and your strength inspires me every day. Thank you so much for listening to my journey. If you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and join our community for more real, unfiltered stories. Stay strong, protect your peace, and I will see you in the next video.